Welcome to the Brain Longevity Therapy Training, the peer-to-peer meeting today on Neuroscience is Fun. So I will take full responsibility because I came up with the title. But I think you'll enjoy it. So my name is Kirti Khalsa. I'm the CEO of the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation. And first of all, I want to thank Chelsea, who is in the background here, helping us run everything smoothly. Thanks, Chelsea. A couple of housekeeping things. Everybody is muted. At some point later, we might open the mic, and at that point, we'll ask you to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. In the meantime, please use the chat to answer Naomi's questions or ask your own questions. So I'm sure you know how to use the chat, and Chelsea and I will be monitoring that. We'll have a lecture first, but it will be interactive. And we'll take questions at the end, mostly, but we'll take questions throughout as well, but we'll try to concentrate towards the end. So as I said before, this is it's going to be a very exciting presentation and something that I believe might stretch our brain. So, which is good for brain exercise for all of us. So I want to introduce you tonight to our speaker, who is taking the brain longevity therapy training herself. Naomi Glover is reaching us and speaking to us from London, England, where it's 9 p.m. So thank you for staying up for this lecture, Naomi. Naomi is an international speaker and consultant in brain health. She's an expert in applied neuroscience and very excited and very enticing about neuroscience. She's passionate about optimizing brain health and performance for healthy longevity, cognitive flexibility, emotional resilience, sharper focus, stronger memory, deeper engagement, and psychological flourishing. She has a background in technology, coaching, learning, and development spanning for 20 years. And she is the director of Neuroinformed Limited, which provides a specialty consultancy and development programs for organizations and individuals. She has a master's degree with distinction in applied neuroscience from King's College in London and has been coaching for over 18 years with particular expertise in brain health, neurodiversity, cognitive training, cognitive behavioral coaching, and executive coaching. So I think this says a lot about Naomi, and I will let you get to know her now. Naomi, I'm passing the mic to you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Kirti. I hope you can you hear me okay, just to start with. It's so lovely of you to invite me, and it's just lovely of everybody to turn up and be interested in neuroscience. Well, I hopefully anyway, and I hope I can make neuroscience fun, at least a bit today. It was lovely when I first spoke to Kirti, and she asked me to come along and do this lecture. She said, "Would you do it with the title of Neuroscience is Fun?" And I said, well, there's a lot of words that, I can think of that could describe neuroscience, but fun isn't usually one of them. And I'd be really interested to hear from you, if you wouldn't mind just putting into the chat box, what are the first words that come to your mind when you think about neuroscience, when somebody says neuroscience to you? What comes to mind? I'm interested to hear your, and how experienced are you in neuroscience?
So complicated.
Complicated, interesting, smarty pants. That's great.
Curious.
Anything
Anybody else?
What else do you think about when people say neuroscience or brain science, lifelong learning? Memory care, great. That's fantastic. Plasticity. Oh, somebody knows about plasticity. I like that.
Fabulous.
Actually, probably you all do, because I forget you've all done this amazing course, which is a brilliant thing that the ARPF, Katie and her husband have put together, some extraordinary achievement. So I'm just going to show you something, because I think it's really interesting when you first think about neuroscience. Most people don't think about it as being fun. They do often think about it as being complicated, and that's something I hear a lot. And it's certainly, I think neuroscience is quite complex, but if we can make it fun, by making it fun and making it fun for your clients, I hope that we'll be able to compel people enough that they'll be able to learn enough about their brain and take better care of it. So I'd like to show you this. What can you see when you see this image?
We don't see an image.
Ah, you don't.
Yes. We don't see your slides yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I hadn't started sharing them yet. Here we are. Right. So this is the title. I'm going to start again then. So this is the title of the talk, Neuroscience is Fun, that Katie invited me to give. And she asked me to make it fun or thought it would be fun as a result of me doing it, which was very kind of her. So I thought I would start by showing you something that was a little bit interesting, and I find this quite compelling. I don't know if you find it fun, but it's certainly compelling. So when you see an image like this, what are you seeing? Can you put anything into the chat box? What do you think you can see? And if you've already seen this image before, you don't have to give it away, but hopefully most of you haven't. I wonder if you can see anything, or is it just kind of smudgy blood vessels movement? Yeah, assuming brain matter. And this, you know, it's so interesting because lots of people assume it's brain matter, it's neurons, that there's it's an fMRI, yes. And so what your brain is trying to do right now is everything it possibly can to try and work out, what is this most like? What do I need to do with it? Because your brain is a predicting organ. So most people think that their brain is designed to think, but actually neuroscientists like Lisa Feldman Barrett have discovered and done an enormous amount of research that identifies that really your brain is there to run your body. That's it. It keeps us alive, and it does that by predicting. So while your brain is trying to work out what this is most like, it's in a state of curiosity. And unless you've seen this before, it's also in a state of experiential blindness. But we can cure that blindness by giving your brain a bit of extra information. So if I show you this, then it cures your experiential blindness, and your brain all of a sudden has gained some new connections, because your brain, as you know, is learning all the time, and it's creating new ideas, but it's also getting new information and creating new synaptic connections. And that's sufficient that when you see that first slide again, which is exactly the same as it was to start with, your brain can make more sense of it. So it's still a smudgy drawing, but you probably can still see the lemon, and you know that those are cranberries, and there's an orange there and some ginger. How does it make you feel knowing that you can create new synaptic connections that quickly? And how do you think it feels for your clients or the people you work with or your family or the people you care for them to discover that too? Exciting and hopeful. That's great. That's really good. Same for me. So part of what it is, it's easier than you thought. Yeah. And empowering. It is very empowering. And that's very interesting because the very next slide I have says exactly that neuroscience is empowering. And there's some brilliant research that came out of a recent study where they were looking at the influence of neuroscience instruction on coaches and on their clients. And I'm talking about this because I know quite a lot of people who take this course are actually their coaches, whether they're coaching yoga or they're life coaches. And so hopefully you already agree with me that neuroscience can be fun. But some research here shows that when coaches gain some neuroscience instruction, and it doesn't have to be a lot of neuroscience instruction, it gives them a sense of self-efficacy in the coaching work that they're doing. Just understanding a bit about the brain made them feel that they had a deeper understanding, so they were more able to coach and support their clients. And it gave their clients, when the coach was able to talk to the clients a little bit about neuroplasticity or about how their brain was working, it gave the clients a sense that there was validation about what they were being told. And they also felt empowered by this new knowledge. So the research is suggesting that neuroscience can be a valuable thing to learn about, but we also know that it's compelling for the public, and people are also more likely to believe explanations if they're based on neuroscience or if they're accompanied by neuroscience images. So that was another research study, which I don't have here, but I can point you to if you're interested. But it just shows that people find neuroscience very compelling. So that's brilliant on the one hand, because it means that you can really engage people with it. But on the other hand, it means that it's really important that you stay up to date and you're giving them accurate information, because otherwise you can accidentally end up misleading people. So the next thing about neuroscience is that it is accelerating, and it's accelerating really quickly. So I wanted to give you a quick sense of just how fast this is happening. So I'd like you to bear in mind that the Alzheimer's Research Prevention Foundation have been talking about lifestyle factors to improve brain health and to reduce the risk of cognitive aging for 30 years. And happy birthday, Kirsty, because it's 30 years this year. But as you can see, in 1993, we knew very little about the actual effect of these things on the living human brain, because the technology just wasn't there to enable us to do it. So most of our understandings over the course of history have come from pathology, autopsies. But now we've got extraordinary technology, things like fMRI and MRI, but other much more advanced technologies, and things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, which are just accelerating the technology so much more, because we can do more with the data. As the data comes in, we can use really big data and use these extraordinary new tools to be able to examine it and pull out more findings. So we have an awful lot more findings. And in fact, we learned more. There's been more papers published, I think, over the last 5 years than there were over the previous 200 that were papers about neuroscience and fMRI and those sorts of things. So that just gives you a sense of how fast it's growing. So we historically, ARPF have been talking about lifestyle factors, but you may also have seen this there was a recent paper published in The Lancet. Did anybody see this paper published in 2020? There was a big hoo-ha about it, which is great. Lots of people talking about it. But I don't know how widely it was publicized. if not, again, I'll share the paper. But the researchers found that there were 12 risk factors which were modifiable. And by modifying those risk factors, you could prevent or delay up to 40% of dementias. And that doesn't even include, so it doesn't include things like sleep, which we already know has a big impact on reducing, on the impact of your cognition. So this research is out there, and it's really important that the research reaches people, but most people still don't know what they can do to protect their brain. And that's why, yes, of course, I'd be delighted to. So I'll share that paper. It's very, very important that people like you are out there sharing this information, because most people still don't know. And there was a piece of research done by the Royal Society for Public Health, where I'm a fellow, and they looked at how did people think about brain health and how much do people know about their brain. And they found that only 34% of people believed that they could reduce their risk of developing dementia, which is quite shocking when you think about it. But strangely, 69% of people, UK adults this is, believed that they could influence their brain health. So there's something peculiar going on with the way that they are thinking about brain health versus dementia prevention. And while they're still kind of unpicking that, it does seem that by talking to people about brain health or healthy longevity or brain longevity, these sorts of very positive terms, people are much more likely to engage with it. And what we want really is people to be engaging at every age, and not just waiting until they're much older, because we know that dementia and the signs of cognitive decline can be seen in the brain 20 years before you get any symptoms. So from imaging, we can actually pick up those symptoms 20 years earlier. And yet people don't start doing anything about it until they reach a much later stage. I also wanted to mention how rare it is for people to get the information that they need, certainly in the UK, and this might differ around the world, and hopefully it's better where you are. But here there's, I know somebody who recently went with some initial memory problems and some concerns about their cognitive health. They went to the GP, to their doctor, and were told, well, yes, maybe we'll refer you to a memory clinic, not given any more information than that. So then they had several months on a waiting list, waiting to get to see a memory clinic. And during that time, they were very anxious. They weren't sleeping properly because they were very anxious. They weren't eating properly because they were very anxious. And it was only afterwards that I found out that this had all gone on and was able to give them some information which turned things around quite a lot. But if I'd known beforehand, or if they had been given the information to start with, they wouldn't have needed to go through that. And we know that those factors, as you've already learned, the lack of sleep, the poor eating, the stress, they all have a negative impact on your memory. So it's just worsening the whole time when people don't have that information. So I am going to emphasize it all comes back to the brain, and your brain is currently controlling over 600 muscles. It's regulating billions of brain cells, and it's pumping blood and hormones around the body. It's digesting food and fighting illness. But most people don't think about their brain until something actually goes wrong with it. And so I'm really hoping that by educating more people about the brain, as you are, as I'm trying to do, and making it as engaging and fun as possible, we can change people's minds and their brains for the better. How many people have heard about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity? What do you know about those things? Have you come across those terms? Yeah, it's possible. Retraining, you've heard the terms, we don't know. Yeah, okay. So neurogenesis is the birth of new neurons in the brain. For a long time, it was thought that after childhood, you could not grow any more neurons in the brain. And work from amazing neuroscientists like Sandrine Duret has found that there are certainly new neurons. Yes, absolutely, in the 1990s. Yes, it was thought that you couldn't make new neurons. But actually what we found is that as we've developed, as the technology has developed, they've found that there are certain areas of the brain where we do continue to grow new neurons. And so in the adult human brain, the new neurons are said to happen in 2 or 3 areas. And there's still some complexity about this, but they believe they find them in the subgranular zone of the dentate gyrus, which is in the hippocampus. And I suspect you probably know that the hippocampus is a region that's very strongly involved in regulating learning and memory. And there are 2 other areas of the brain where they think it's likely that neurogenesis is happening. There is some possibility that it might be happening in the amygdala too. So newborn neurons that come from adult neurogenesis in the hippocampus, they play really crucial roles in regulating your mood, in your memory, and in spatial learning. And so the other really interesting thing about Sandrine Duret's work is that she's looked at what might increase the birth of these new neurons and what might damage it. And she found that that one of the things that was damaging it were things like chemotherapy, which might explain why people have some depression that continues even after they've had chemotherapy, even after they're clear of cancer. She was finding that people still had very low mood, they had depression, and that they think is related to the lack of new neurons. So there is a huge amount of complexity going on, but it's also so hopeful. And when I was studying, and this is all so new, because when I was studying my master's just a few years ago, we had a paper coming out saying we can get new neurons in the human brain, and then the next month it was no, we can't. And then it was yes, we can, and now there's a very definite yes, we can. We're not sure in how many areas, but it's very much happening. So neurogenesis is about the birth of new neurons, and neuroplasticity is about connections between neurons, and that, we think, is why we have something called cognitive reserve. So I don't know if you've heard about cognitive reserve, if you've heard the term, but the idea came out of a nun study. It's the most famous longitudinal research study on Alzheimer's, and it played a really crucial role in demonstrating that Alzheimer's disease and dementia couldn't just simply be explained by biology. And there were 678 Catholic sisters aged 75 to 107 who agreed to take part in regular cognitive tests and then to donate their brains to science. Very, very, very kind bunch of ladies. Now, the data in the study also included early and middle life risk factors that they took from the convent archives. One case history included an 85-year-old who had retained physical and cognitive function despite being genetically predisposed to Alzheimer's and having copious disease lesions in the brain. So what they were able to do was do these amazing, quite rigorous cognitive function tests over a really long period. And then after the nuns had died, they were able to look at the brains and see, was this a very healthy looking brain? Was it a less healthy looking brain? did it look like an Alzheimer's brain? And what they found, and this is how they got the sense that it's not always that you will always have dementia with Alzheimer's, that people could have really quite diseased looking brains, very, very lots of plaques and tangles, which are typical of Alzheimer's. And yet they showed no symptoms at all of any cognitive decline during their lifetime. On the other hand, there were people who had really quite healthy looking brains, but were showing signs of cognitive decline. So the two are not completely linked. There are things that we can do which seem to protect our cognitive health, our memory, our thinking, our mood, our emotional regulation, all of those things throughout life, even if we are predisposed to Alzheimer's. And those factors, like food, for example, which is covered in your course, even when you have the high risk alleles for Alzheimer's, which is the ApoE4, I'm sure you know, if you have 2 copies of the ApoE4 risk allele, the risk of Alzheimer's is it's about 8 times higher. I can check, but it's significantly higher. Yet at least half of that risk is reducible using the right dietary factors. So there is an awful lot that we can do through life, and that's really shown in the neuroscience research. Here's one very recent study, which comes from May 2022, just last year, where they were looking at the connecting link between nutrition, lifestyle, and Alzheimer's disease. And as you can see from this, they're comparing a healthy brain with an Alzheimer's type brain, and looking at the sorts of things that have had an impact. Now, BDNF, this is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it's, if you think about it like miracle grow for brain cells, it's this amazing stuff that gets released into the brain and helps to grow new neurons and keep them really healthy, and they're really extraordinary. Now, what we know is that, in fact, now from the research, that when you have the healthy diet, like the diets that are explained in the ARPF brain longevity therapy course, those factors, those foods increase BDNF. So they're increasing this miracle growth for the brain. It increases really quite quickly, and it reduces inflammation, which we know is damaging to the brain. And it also increases insulin sensitivity, which is good for managing your blood sugars. So poor insulin sensitivity leads to things like diabetes, and then that's again very damaging to the brain, to the heart, to body generally. So both of these factors, it's talking here about both the Mediterranean diet and exercise. Exercise increases BDNF really quickly. Even, you know, just one exercise bout of exercise is enough to get that BDNF level lifted up. So it's really encouraging, I think, to be able to share that sort of information with people who may find it harder to exercise, or harder to motivate themselves to exercise, or harder to motivate themselves to eat a healthy diet. Because when you can explain to people just how quickly these things can make a difference to your brain, it's really, I think it's very reassuring and empowering. So on the other hand, they've got the Alzheimer's disease factors, which are vastly increased by the Western diet. So the people sometimes talk about the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet, I'm sorry to say, where you have a lot of burgers and fried foods, unhealthy foods. Now, it's interesting in the in this image, they have red wine on the Western diet. And actually red wine is one of the few things, it's probably the only alcohol that that is associated with healthier brain aging, because of a substance that it contains called resveratrol, which is apparently good for helping to strengthen the brain. Now, alcohol is not good for the brain, so it's a kind of balancing act to play. But if you are going to have any alcohol, red wine is probably the one to have. So having that unhealthy diet, having a sedentary lifestyle, obesity, that lack of exercise, they all reduce BDNF, they increase inflammation, which is damaging to the brain, and they reduce insulin sensitivity, making you more prone to diabetes. So I hope that gives you a quick insight into some of the most recent research, and I was quite keen to share that as much as possible, because I think it's really nice to see just how fast this research is moving. I'm just going to watch my time. Kirsty, do tell me if I need to stop, will you? Because I do get a bit carried away talking about these things. I get very excited. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is helping people to develop executive function and to maintain that. And those are the executive functions are those things like your ability to communicate, to manage your emotions, to make sensible decisions, to brainstorm things. And what we know is that the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, is the part of the brain that is most important for that executive function. And so it carries out higher reasoning, abstract thought, language production happens in Broca's area, which is also fairly close to the front. Working memory, your concentration, planning, organization, insight and judgment, hope, optimism, empathy, moral conscience, higher order decision making, and inhibiting inappropriate impulses, habits, and emotions. So hopefully it makes sense to you. You might already have an idea of why it is that I focus so hard on this ability to control to improve executive function. And it's because I quite frequently work with people who have things like ADHD, where executive function is quite dysregulated, and it means that there's a lot of poorer decision making. There's a lack of inhibition, so people get they'll make a decision very, very quickly, just on impulse, and it won't necessarily be a good one. So they see the cake, they eat the cake, or they fancy an alcoholic binge. They're much more likely to do that just because of executive dysfunction. And we see in the research that people with ADHD or people with challenges to their executive function are more likely to end up with things like Alzheimer's. So there is an increased risk. And they're looking at how much of that is down to genetics and how much of it is because they make so many poor lifestyle decisions. They're also dysregulated in their sleep. They have a higher likelihood of obesity. So there's lots of things that can increase the risk of cognitive aging or faster cognitive aging in people who have executive dysfunction. So by focusing on teaching that, my hope is that we can improve that quite quickly. There are other things that can really impact on our brain and on our brain health, things like the hormones. And again, this is mentioned in the course, but there's some recent research by Professor Lisa Mosconi, who's looked at the brain before and after menopause. And during that time, there is quite a big change. And it really underpins the brain-based symptoms of perimenopause, which can often be things like tiredness, disturbed sleep, memory lapses, decreased libido, mood changes, panic disorders, increased anxiety, temperature changes, depression, and difficulty concentrating. So all of those things, again, potentially might be adding to the risk of cognitive decline. So I emphasize to people it's really important that they manage their physical health, that they're seeing a GP if they have any cognitive changes at all, because sometimes those cognitive changes are as a result of hormonal changes, not necessarily just estrogen, but other hormonal changes as well. And those cognitive changes can also be as a result of stress. And the recent research, again, is finding that how we perceive stress really matters. And so even if you're in a workplace where there's very high levels of stress, that chronic occupational stress can be associated with cerebral changes, but that fortunately they are reversible, or at least partially reversible, when you reduce the stress levels or when you change the perception of stress. The stress stops being damaging. So there's some very interesting work about stress. If you're perceiving stress as damaging, as something harmful, it actually does more physical harm to the body and to the brain. If you perceive a stressful situation as exciting, energizing, challenging, it doesn't have the same physical effect. And again, I'm happy to share the research on that. And there's a brilliant TED talk that I can share on that. Fascinating work on stress. So when people say that they're stressed, you may not be able to take away the cause of the stress. That you may not be able to take away the cause of the stress, but what you can do is change the perception to stress. And also, hopefully, by doing those things such as yoga, teaching people meditation, you're helping them to manage their stress and they're helping them to manage their executive function. So because your brain is a predicting machine, as we've already talked about, if you see stress as something that should cause panic, your body is responding and constructing emotions and having behavioral responses that result in more stress, but also in inflammation and damage to the brain. And by contrast, if you are viewing the situation as exciting, then you get a different sort of response. So you'll get the much more positive approach, and people actually, they perform better. So in exams, people perform better as well if they go into an exam saying that they feel excited compared to saying that they feel stressed or anxious. Then they actually perform better, even if they have the same base level of ability. So I'm going to jump on quickly to show you that there are some little brain hacks that I try to show to people. And I think trying to break it down into small things that people can learn about their brain just makes it a bit more enticing, a bit more manageable, and a bit more engaging. So there is a brilliant piece of research by a chap called Ian Robertson, who works at Trinity in Ireland. And he's discovered that there is a tiny part of the brain called the locus coeruleus. And it's this tiny little spot here. And locus coeruleus means blue spot. And it's the only part of the brain which actually generates noradrenaline. Noradrenaline is a remarkable neurotransmitter in the brain, which helps people to focus and engage and learn things. And it's just this remarkable thing. And it projects from this tiny little bit of the brain, the locus coeruleus, which is right in the brainstem. It projects all over the brain. So it's kind of showering the whole brain in this wonderful noradrenaline. If your noradrenaline levels are too low, then you find it harder to focus. You might find it harder to remember things because, you know, you can't remember things if you can't focus. And people often forget that, you know, memory is affected by your ability to focus. So if you can focus, then you're much more likely to be able to remember something. So if your noradrenaline is too low, or then you may lack focus. If your noradrenaline level is too high, you might be experiencing anxiety. But the locus coeruleus is also absolutely exquisitely chemosensitive, which means that it changes how much noradrenaline it releases in relation to your breathing. Now, I know that as proponents of Curtin Kriya and all of these amazing yoga exercises, breathing is something you're teaching all the time. So I thought it might be useful to share with you that this tiny part of the brain, which is so impactful for focus and for memory, and also impacts on anxiety, is directly affected by how you breathe, by the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood. So if you have somebody who is feeling anxious, they can dial down that anxiety within just a couple of breaths by breathing out for a bit longer than they breathe in. So if you're breathing in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6 or out for a count of 8, then within 2 to 3 breaths, that will have adjusted the amount of noradrenaline being released from the locus coeruleus, and the anxiety will dial down. By contrast, if you have somebody who is struggling to focus, somebody who is a bit low and demotivated, then just by swapping that around, by having them breathe in for longer than they breathe out, that will dial up the amount of noradrenaline and increase focus. So I find this is one of the most useful things that I teach, and I teach it to pretty much everybody I come across because I think it's such an extraordinary and important finding, and just massively useful. And I think I'm probably due to be finishing, but I'm just going to briefly talk about a couple of other things. So Mendi, this is something that I have been exploring recently. This is a type of neurofeedback. I don't know if you've come across neurofeedback, but it is designed for boosting memory, focus, and enhancing performance. And this is what it looks like. It's a brain headband, and you have lots of different types of neurofeedback devices. So one of them, this one in particular, uses a technology called near-infrared spectroscopy, and it's looking at how much blood flow is coming to the front of your brain. And as you may know, as you have an increase in blood flow to the brain, that's associated with increased focus, increased concentration, but also a healthier brain. So if you can help people to increase the blood flow to the front of their brain more often, more frequently, then the hope is that will be protective. And it certainly seems to be associated with better cognitive function. So when you're looking at, and I'm quite interested to see what would happen if somebody were wearing this, if they were doing yoga. Certainly it's affected by breathing. So when I use it and I'm concentrating on my breathing, the blood flow definitely increases compared to when I'm not focused on my breathing. So it's a very very interesting thing. I'm very keen to do more research with it. I know that they are also keen to do research. So if anybody has a way of doing some research and would like to, please let me know. They're very keen to do more research. They're currently researching with NASA for focus, and I'm running a brain health event on Saturday. I'm going to take some along and try to get people trying them out and getting them engaged in brain health. And cognitive training, again, this is something which there has been some contradictions about whether cognitive training is effective. The latest research finds that some cognitive training certainly is effective. There are lots of brain training games out there that are not effective, or that, you know, you can use them and you'll get better at the game, but that doesn't generalize to other skills or a broader generalized intelligence. But there are some brain training games that certainly do appear to be much more impactful, and in research studies have had an impact, including one which improves people's ability to drive. So people's driving ability often declines with older age, and this appears to mitigate against that and protect against that decline that can cause more accidents. Again, happy to share the study afterwards if that is of interest. So overall, our brain's not seeing the truth, it's just predicting, and when it's predicting uncontrollable stress, it shrinks, it becomes less effective. It's more vulnerable to stress at certain times. So times like the adolescence and up to age 28, during pregnancy and in perimenopause. And all of those times, people should be looking after their brain. People should be looking after their brain anyway, right the way through life, but mostly they're not aware of it. And so I wanted to share some brain hacks. I don't think I've shown you 5 of them this evening, but I'm very happy to share more of them. And so your brain can be improved and protected through life. And it's really important that we try and share that information as much as we possibly can. So I'm so grateful to you all for doing that. And I hope that that was something of what you were hoping I was going to do, Katie.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we have a few questions. But I would like to interject something that we had discussed, because many of us here are yoga teachers. I was wondering if you could take a few minutes and talk to us about, research on yoga and neuroscience. I mean, you mentioned the breathing, but was there anything else that you could tell us? And then, of course, we have these questions, so we want to leave time for the questions for sure.
Yeah, sure. So yes, so there is some emerging research. It's quite early days, as I think we spoke about earlier, Kirsty, when we were speaking. But yes, there are some studies, which again, I'd be very happy to share. There are physical, they're finding both structural and functional brain changes in people who are regularly practicing yoga and also regular meditators. Things like the amygdala, which is the part of the brain which tends to be, historically people have associated with being the fear center of the brain, but actually it's not just about fear, it's about anything that's salient in your environment. So having that part of the brain is found to be larger in people who have anxiety and anxiety disorders. Meditation and also yoga are found to shrink that part of the brain. So you actually get a physical shrinking in the amygdala. And that's in line with people describing lower levels of anxiety, which I think is very, very interesting. They see an increase in white matter, which white matter is the fatty myelin sheath that coats not all neurons, but some neurons get coated in this amazing white sheath, which acts as a kind of insulator, and it speeds up connectivity so that those connections can go much more quickly. Again, it's protected. It seems to be developed more in people who are meditating and doing yoga. And it's also, just to say, that fatty myelin sheath, it's made of fat, and that's why it's so important that people are eating those good fats, the healthy fats, the oleic acids, the or the olive oils, and things like avocados, all of those healthy fats, nuts, seeds, the things that you talk about everybody should have, all contributes to the health of that area.
Great, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to the questions from the top. So in the BLTT course, it was mentioned that the criteria for cognitive reserve were education and literacy. It would seem that lifelong intellectual curiosity would be an important factor also.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's different there are different thoughts about cognitive reserve and brain reserve, and how they might be slightly different. And they talk about brain reserve as being a brain that somehow was perhaps a bit bigger to start with, and so it had more capacity for shrinkage without really losing very much. But cognitive reserve is different in as much as it relates to those connections that you've built up over a lifetime. So part of it is education, education in your youth, but more years of education are associated with higher levels of cognitive reserve. So the more you educate yourself, the more curious you are, the more you read. Reading is really good for cognitive reserve, well evidenced over lots of studies. Again, happy to share. There are lots of studies around things like crosswords. So it's not, people used to think that it was, word puzzles and things. So if you do a normal word puzzle, you might get better at doing word puzzles. If you do a brain training game, you might get better at the brain training game, but not necessarily, that's not necessarily going to convert into being good at other things. Whereas with some things, like reading, that seems to have a big impact, and that's protective against protecting vocabulary. But they believe that part of the benefit of reading, and this is not just, this is reading for pleasure, importantly, it's reading for pleasure, is different than just reading because you've got to read something. Reading for pleasure, you're really getting absorbed into a book, and that's absorbing you in other people's lives, and that sociability and insight of being absorbed in other people's lives and other people's histories and exciting things, and being totally focused on that seems to have brain benefits of its own.
Great. So speaking of exercise, we talked about mental exercise, and now there's a question on physical exercise. What and how much is walking considered exercise for the BDNF specifically?
Yeah. So for BDNF, anything, I mean, even a 10-minute walk is enough to increase levels of BDNF. The more, the better, which is always going to be the, but not excessively. So, and particularly for women, moderate exercise appears to be better for the brain than really, really vigorous exercise, which I was delighted to hear. that was happy news for me. But so things like anything where you're increasing your heart rate, but brisk walking ideally. But if you've got people who find it very difficult to move, even just a small amount of movement is going to be better than nothing. And hopefully you can find some ways in which they can move, even if it's not as easy for them, even if they tend to be more sedentary. The other thing which I thought was very interesting when I learned about this just recently, the cerebellum, which is the back of the brain here, and traditionally it's been very much associated with motion and balance, and so if you're good at yoga, you've probably got quite a well-developed cerebellum. But some research recently has found that it's not just about physical balance, but also emotional balance and cognition. And so by they find that people who have emotional dysregulation or cognitive dysregulation or problems in memory, there is again a difference in the cerebellum, which seemingly, again, you know, we're waiting for more studies to come out, but they are emerging. But it seems from the current studies that improving balance, so through things like standing on one leg, the sorts of things you do in yoga, being upside down, also things like juggling, which you might do less in yoga, but apparently is really good for the brain. Or standing on one of those balance board things. You know, it's kind of got a ball underneath, and then there's a platform on top, and you have to stand on it. Standing on a balance board is also apparently good for increasing those connections in the cerebellum. And cerebellum, while it's quite a small part of the brain, it's just ridiculously chocked with neurons. So about 75% of your brain cells are in your cerebellum. So it's really worth exercising it. And I, you know, I don't have the research to back it up, but it certainly makes logical sense to me that could be a meaningful area for study for people doing yoga, you know, looking at what's the impact of yoga on the cerebellum.
Good point. Yes, thank you. So one comment is that one of my favorite quotes is that the body listens to what the brain thinks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, the research on stress is very much linked to that, isn't it? That if you're going into an exam, for example, thinking that you're going to be panic struck, your brain is thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to be awful, this is going to be awful, and it does affect your body. But also there's some brilliant research on emotions and on the theory of constructed emotions, which you may or may not have come across. This is from the lab of Lisa Feldman Barrett. Again, she's identified that where people used to think that emotions were hardwired, that's not the case, and there is no evidence for hardwiring of emotions. And instead, it appears that we construct emotions. So we have a feeling in our body, and then based on the situation where we are, we work out what that emotion is, and we construct an emotion around it. So, for example, she tells this brilliant story about being in a restaurant and going out for dinner with somebody for the first time, and she's sitting, and she wasn't that keen on them, and but she's having dinner with them, and then she thinks, well, maybe I like them more than I thought, because I'm feeling a little bit flushed, and my heart's going a little bit faster, so I must really like him. So he said, would you like to go for another date? And she said, well, yes, okay. Then she got home and then was violently ill, and then realized that actually it was stomach flu. She had feelings for him at all. And it's only when you think about it in those terms that you realize that those things can be very similar. The feeling of excitement, you get a churning, you get a heart flutter, excitement or fear or stomach flu sometimes can be very similar, and by teaching people to relabel that emotion, to think about a situation in a different way, can be a very powerful way of helping them to reduce anxiety. And I certainly use that a lot with students. I teach them, if they're going into an exam, that if they think about getting excited, and the reason that their heart is going faster is because they're trying to pump more blood to their brain to give them more oxygen so they can think faster. And it works. It makes a difference to how people perform.
That's great story. About the Mendy, The question is, has it been tested with breathing and meditation? Because, you know, we have the experts here. Naomi.
So they are doing various bits of research at the moment. It's mostly been tested for focus, and the way that they've been testing it so far is they have a this is what it looks like, and you put it on, and then it links to a game on your phone, and when you focus on it, there's a ball that lifts and then gives you kind of positive feedback and goes ding, 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 ding. Oh, you're doing really well lifting this ball with your brain. And then when you lose focus, it drops. Now, the idea of a neurofeedback device is that it kind of holds a mirror up to your brain. So you can't normally see what your brain is doing. You can't see how your brain is reacting. So when you learn to walk, you might get a little bit wobbly to start with, but gradually you get feedback from falling over or, you know, wobbling. And then once you, as you gain more feedback from your body, you get better at balancing yourself, and then gradually you learn to walk, and walking happens for most people most of the time. But we don't get that sort of feedback from our brains. So instead, with our what neurofeedback does is it holds that mirror up to the brain and gives people that bit of information that they didn't otherwise have about how much oxygen is flowing to the front of their brain in the case of FNERS, or in some of the other devices they use, EEG, which is measuring the electrical changes in the brain. And so there's lots and lots of different neurofeedback devices now. I'm working with a couple of the firms, and actually there's a new one that I'm linking up with, which measures breathing, gives you feedback and coaching on your breathing. So again, that might be one that would be very, very interesting to try out with meditation. So again, I can send a link to that, and I think I get a special offer, so I'll see if I can send you that as well if anybody's interested in it. But that's one I haven't tried yet, so I can't say anything about it yet because I haven't tried it, haven't tested it. Mendy does seem to be useful, and that's what I'm taking with me on Saturday to try out with people.
And
good to try it, I think, as much as possible.
Yes, Mary Lou says that she looked up the Mendy device. It's on sale for $299. It's usually $349. I mean, we're not telling people they need to.
By no means, you don't need to buy. No, you don't need to buy these things. But I'm just kind of pointing out the various different things that are coming out of neuroscience, including this, you know, technology like this, which used to be only available in labs. So the only way that you could measure somebody's prefrontal blood flow would be to wire them up to a massive thing in a lab, which makes it very difficult to measure anything realistic in the real world. Whereas when you miniaturize technology, all of a sudden you can do things in a life, you know, in a life setting, and get more realistic feedback. It might not be as detailed as the lab feedback, but it might be more realistic because it's coming from a you know, real life rather than a lab.
Right. And this also points out to the fact of technology being so much more accessible. So if I had a magic, you know, wand or something, if I could see the future, I would predict that we'll see more and more of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely seeing that. I work a lot with entrepreneurs and people who are starting out in developing technology, and yeah, it's growing, and it's growing really fast. And that's not surprising, because the technology that's making it possible is also growing really fast. There are ways now of measuring pretty much everything from home. So the sorts of tests that people could never get unless they were incredibly wealthy. I mean, it's still pricey, but there were tests or technology that you couldn't get unless you managed to get into a serious lab. and now they're available from home. You know, people wear, I don't know if you've seen these blood sugar measuring devices that people just stick on their arm, and then it beams their blood levels, their blood sugar levels to their phone. It is remarkable. So you can monitor those sorts of things really easily. I wear a smartwatch, and it tells me how I sleep. What sort of sleep did I get? How long did I spend in each type of sleep? How much REM sleep did I get? How much deep sleep? I don't always necessarily want to know, because sometimes it's not very healthy looking, but you know, it's good to be able to get that information. And I was with somebody the other day who fell ill in a shop, and I could put my watch on them and do a quick ECG to measure their heart rhythms. So it is remarkable now what you can do with technology that is not cheap, but often more accessible than it was.
Right. So we have a couple more questions. Could you send links to more information about brain training games? So we'll get that for you for the handout. And then you had mentioned 5 brain hacks. Do you want to quickly talk about it so we satisfy some curiosity?
So the brain hacks were those ones where I was talking about, for example, the noradrenaline hack. So that's an example of a brain hack, and I think it's really useful to, I just label them as brain hacks. You can call them anything you like, but things that people can do practically that will have a big impact on their brain. Things like making sure they've drunk enough water, which often people forget to do, like making sure that they're getting sleep. And huge number of people have real problems with insomnia and sleep dysregulation. Sometimes me too. It's really frustrating, and it's even more frustrating when you know how important sleep is. It makes you slightly more anxious about it. It's like, oh my goodness, it's not just that I can't sleep, but my brain's deteriorating. So I think you have to be quite careful about, the how much you emphasize the dangers to people. I saw a neuroscientist recently talking about a 5% increase in I think it might have been amyloid plaques after one night of bad sleep. And I thought, yeah, so I'm going to go, don't quote me on that. Do not quote me on that, because I might have misheard him, and I'm really hoping I misheard him. But I'm going to go back and check what he said and what it was based on. But those sorts of things, having the right amount of sleep, things like having the right amount of vitamin D. A ridiculous number of people are deficient in vitamin D and have no idea that they're low. I had no idea I was low. Somebody told me to get a blood test done, and I was massively deficient. I had no clue at all. And that can have a huge impact, again, on cognition, on memory, focus, even sleep. Huge brain impact. And often you need much more than you realize. But again, it's a check with your doctor thing, because I'm not a medic. So please don't take my word for it, or go out and start taking lots of vitamins. There are some vitamins that are definitely associated with better brain health. And then there's bits of research coming out, like the taurine research. I don't know if anybody read that. People saying that taurine was going to be good for longevity. Again, it's as research comes out, we have to be really careful, really mindful about looking to see how much evidence is there for it. Is there any potential this could actually be damaging? So I make sure when I'm working with people that I try to give them the latest research, but I'm emphatic about the fact that this has not been through clinical trials. This is just what they're finding. However, the clinical trials take so long. On average, it takes 15 years for a piece of research to get from the lab into people's lives. And we can't wait that long when it comes to things like, cognitive decline. So I think it's, while I'm really mindful about not passing on neuromyths or anything that might be misleading, I do like to share the latest research with people, and I'll say there is evidence that shows that 17% of people are so there was a piece of research that said 17% of Alzheimer's could be prevented entirely if everybody here was taking the right amount of vitamin D. So 17%. I mean, when you compare that against the almost negligible findings sometimes of the pharmaceuticals that they're offering at the moment, it's remarkable. So that's the sort of research I like to share, the sort of stuff that came out in the Lancet paper, and from really good, robust researchers.
Thank you. And actually, I wanted to mention that we will of course send you the link to the Lancet paper, but also we published a summary of that Lancet paper in layman's term back in 2020 when the paper came out, because it's a gigantic paper. So we kind of summarized it and made some commentary, because of course they didn't really have any, I shouldn't say of course, but I said it. They didn't have any lifestyle recommendations. They just did the research and they said, these are the risk factors, and that's it. So yeah. We actually wrote a white paper, which is available for free on the website. Actually, Chelsea included the link to the entire paper here, so you can download it. It's up at towards the top of the chat, and you can download it.
Oh, brilliant!
Just so that everybody knows. But yes, that research was very important, and it gave so much credit. Oh, and Chelsea, thank you. She just reposted it at the end of the chat. It just gave so much more credibility in some way to our work and your work, as brain longevity specialists. So definitely use it, reference to it, because it's really a big deal. And so did I miss any questions? Is there anyone? Oh, yes, one more comment. My husband has a cardio monitor the size of a credit card that tells him when he's in AFib.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? It's just extraordinary. Yeah. I think the technology is really moving on. There's a lot of apps now which will help you measure absolutely everything. And I think the way we're moving is for personalized medicine, much more personalized care, but it will take time. So in the short term, I think it's really useful if people like you, people like me, can work with people on a more personalized level and say, okay, which of these things are you doing? Are you doing the sleep thing? And are you doing the food thing? Which things are you not doing? Okay, well, let's try and do more of those things, because most people still don't know. And it's massively frustrating that people are going to be having more brain problems than they need to be, when we could be picking this up earlier and preventing it.
Right. Perfect. And well, thank you, everyone. We have a lot of thank yous to you, Naomi.
I'd love any feedback. That would be really helpful.
Yes.
Feedback is always very much appreciated.
Great. We have a lot of thank yous. Really appreciate the presentation. Look forward to a handout. It's been fascinating. And it's been an excellent talk. Thank you so much. Super presentation. I learned so much. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. You're a fabulous teacher. Yay!
It was fun. It was fun.
Excellent, intelligent, and motivating. And this was fun. You're an excellent presenter. Your smile is great too.
You're very, very kind. You lovely people. Thank you so much. You've made my evening just before I go to bed.
Oh, fabulous. So yes, you're very much appreciated. So thank you again. And I will say on the sort of tail end of this, and I just want to mention that, we'll have fabulous speakers. We'll talk on many of these topics at our fall conference, the 30 Years of Alzheimer's Prevention. We have amazing clinicians, researchers, you name it. We hope that you join us. We are just so excited to learn more about these topics, and have you be able to ask the questions like, how much vitamin D? How often should I measure? If you're curious about this, we have the really fabulous, perfect people that will be speaking. So, and the exercise and, spirituality. So consider it, and you'll hear from us. And on this, thank you, Naomi. Yes, please connect with Naomi.
If anybody wants to ask me a question, I've put my link there and you can send me a message.
Yes, please do. Now you know who to ask. So I'm so happy that we could make it happen for you today. Thank you, Naomi, for staying up so late.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Katie, and thank you all for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you all.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye.